Yes, thank you for introducing me, and it's nice to see some familiar faces, and it's nice to see a couple of new faces. So I'm really excited to have you here today because this is a topic I think we all talk about a lot, resilience, but I think it's a topic that's important that we kind of understand to make sure that we use it appropriately. So yeah, my name is Simon, and you can get started actually on the next one. So before I kind of get started, Kirsty did a great job introducing me, and many of you already know me, but I want to just briefly introduce myself again. And the main reason for that is that every time I've sat in the audience and listened to someone talk, my initial thought has been like, why should I listen to you? Who are you? And when they don't introduce themselves or kind of give some sort of background or anything like that, my initial response is, should I be listening to you? So so a little bit about me, as Kirsty mentioned, I used to be a golfer back in the day, and my goal was always to kind of turn pro one day, but I'm standing here now, so obviously that didn't quite materialize. But you know what? In all fairness, in all honesty, I'm actually really happy that didn't materialize, because trying to turn professional is something that's highly overrated and takes up way too much time and way too much energy and resources. So anyway, long story short, I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to be speaking to all of you today. As coaches, I've been really fortunate that my whole life I've had a variety of different coaches guide me along the way and kind of help shape me who I was as an athlete and who I was as a person. And my experience with coaches is that you all care so much about the athletes you work with that you will always put their needs first, and that is incredible. But it comes at a cost that you don't necessarily support yourselves the way you need to be supported. So I like spending a lot of time doing sessions like this where it's just about coaches and not necessarily directly about the athletes. On that note, yes, I once was an athlete, and I have a lot of educational background in understanding coach behaviors and the role that coaches play, but I'm not an expert in your sport. So I'm just talking to you today as an athlete and a researcher, but not as a coach. So I do not want you to, I'm not coming in here saying this is how you need to coach. And if you get the sense that I'm doing it, please tell me off. I'm simply coming here to say, here's some things we can consider when we're engaging in our role as coaches, okay? All right. So, just as much as I like sharing a bit about myself, I like to get to know the people I'm chatting with. I know a few faces here, but I don't know if you all know each other. So if you could just kind of like give me a name, like what sport you coach, and like share something about yourselves. I'll just start with you, Matt.
My name's Matt. I coach soccer, soccer Nova Scotia. An interesting thing. After 5 years.
Resilience, and there's kind of two things I want to touch on. One, what is resilience? It's a term we all use frequently, so I want to make sure that we kind of, when we leave here, that we start using it or understand what it actually is. And then two, how can coaches use it in their day-to-day environment? So I hope that we can accomplish this goal, and if not, please let me know. So we'll start off with what is it? And some of the stuff's a little bit academic, and I apologize, but I just want to give you a little bit of insight into how messed up resilience it actually is. And so it's a popular buzz term that we've all heard and we all use in day-to-day life, and it's been studied for decades in pretty much any single area you can think of, which is good. The problem with that is, with it being such a popular term, it means that we don't really know what it is. Like, there's so many different definitions used for it. It's used interchangeably with other terms like mental toughness, grit, hardiness, and basically that just conflates it and confuses it and means we don't really understand what it actually is. So, to put that in perspective, one research article looked at 1,300 articles that examined resilience and found over 930 different definitions of resilience. So academics don't like agreeing with each other, but that's really bad. So like, that's really messed up. So what that means is that the way that like we describe resilience in research, within research, it's chaos. It's basically just chaotic. And the reason for that is that in the last 15 years, there was about more than 9 studies were published that looked at like what is resilience from a conceptual standpoint. in the last 15 years. That is a lot of studies looking at this. To put that in other terms, I did a study, a review study on fear of failure, which is my area, and in the last 20 years, I'm the only one who published this study in this area. So there's one study in my area in this field in the last 20 years, and in resilience, there's more than 9 in the last 15 years. So academics have no idea really what it is. Like, we do, but we don't. So on that point, I'll pass it over to you. What do you think resilience is? Maybe you can help us out. How would you define resilience? Or how, not necessarily, let's say, an academic definition, but when you think of resilience, what comes to mind?
For me, it's kind of like, I don't think adversity is a word, but dealing with adversity or unexpected situation.
Yeah.
So persevere.
Being able to persevere with unexpected situations, yeah, very good. Yeah, I think that touches. Anyone else?
Yeah, the ability to productively navigate things like outliers, like things that are really bad or hard, being like, wow, this is so good and amazing, which can also sometimes be tough to navigate.
Yeah, so being able to navigate challenging situations, whether they're considered negative or positive. Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else got anything else to add to that?
I think that being able to absorb blow and downside.
Yeah. Yeah. So being able to successfully overcome setbacks. Yeah. So it's almost like proactive and preventative kind of thing. Is that a fair way to?
There's certainly proactive and preventative aspect.
Yeah.
And also in the moment being able to absorb the emotional impact of a setback or something, and then being able to refocus.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. Anyone got any idea what the difference is between, let's say, resilience and mental toughness? Me neither, so that's fine.
Thanks, Simon.
Yeah.
So so deep.
Yeah. So generally speaking, the way we define resilience, so everything you said, you're all pretty much spot on with it. Generally speaking, it's being able to successfully navigate some type of adversity successfully, right? And the term adversity is an important thing to think about because it's contextual. So adversity can fluctuate depending on the situation you're facing. It can be an everyday stressor that you're facing as adversity. It can also be something significant as a bereavement. So very different types of adversity can exist. So it's not just one size fits all kind of thing. And the other important thing to note there is what John had kind of touched on, is that adversity doesn't have to be negative. So if we think about if you get a job promotion, it's really exciting, and we wouldn't consider that a negative thing, but the increased workload, the navigating the new challenges you face is some type of adversity. So if we put that in perspective like an athlete, let's say an athlete becomes, moves on up into from provincial team to national team, that's exciting and that's really cool, but now they're facing new challenges that they have to face. So that's part of the being resilient as well, as being able to overcome successful positive challenges as well as negative. So not really going to read the definition out just because so we can see and hear it. So in academia, the definition that I like using is the role of mental processes and behavior in promoting personal assets and protecting an individual from the potential negative effect of stresses. So that's a mouthful. So you don't need to walk away remembering this, really. It's not that important. But I like having this table down here because I think that is a good job explaining in more simple terms what resilience is and what it isn't. So really, as you kind of alluded to, resilience is the ability to maintain functioning when under pressure. So just being able to successfully get through situations when under pressure. And it's preventative and proactive approach to managing stress as well. And, you got ahead of yourself there. What else it is, it's a dynamic interaction between the individual and the environment. So that's really the main takeaway, is resilience is an interaction between the individual and their environment. What is resilient not? It's not this special trait that only a few people have. anyone can develop resilience. Anyone, it's not a fixed trait, anyone can develop skills that enhance their resilience. And it's not something that is, it's also not the suppression of emotions. Oftentimes we hear stories around, oh, those individuals are resilient because they didn't get sad, or they didn't get mad, or they didn't get upset, or whatever. That's not resilience. Resilience is actually being able to thrive through challenging situations, despite it, while showing off emotions as well. Okay? Does that make sense to everyone so far? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, to that point, if anyone has a question like this before group of us, feel free to just like yell out. Like that's totally okay. So the definition didn't use the term adversity, it used the term stressors. And I like that term stressors because adversity kind of carries like a negative connotation. We always assume adversity is something undesirable, but we'll use this, moving forward, we'll use the term stressor because it allows for a wider variety of situations to be included in. And so some examples of stressors that athletes might face, or even coaches, are competitive stressors. So like preparing for an event, dealing with the pressure of tournaments, expectations, and rivalry. Those are some competitive stresses that individuals might face, regardless of what role they play. Then there's like organizational stresses like leadership and personal issues, or maybe like team-related issues you might be facing. And then there's the personal stresses that everyone experiences, so like work-life balance and like family-related stuff. So these are kind of like the three broad categories of stresses that exist that impact the individual. And to that point about stresses, oftentimes we think of stresses as a bad thing and we want to remove all stress as possible. When in fact, stress is actually really important for our mental health and our well-being and for performance. So we shouldn't try and remove stresses altogether from our lives, but really we just want to find a balance. We want to be challenged, but we don't want to be challenged to the point where we can't keep up with life anymore. The same also says if there's zero stresses in life, it's also a bit like, well, what am I, now what? So it's all about finding that balance, which I'm sure you've all heard in many discussions before. There's no right or wrong answer. It's everything depends on a balance. So yeah, but hopefully by the end of today, we'll kind of have an understanding of what that balance might look like. Okay, so now moving on from the academic stuff, moving on to something a bit more exciting. How can resilience be positively influenced? So if we look at this model here, that was, so just to give a bit of background, I used this guy's research a lot, Mustafa Saka, because a lot of his research in resilience was done with like Olympic athletes and like really high, the top of the top, like I think military as well, but specifically he's done a lot of research with Olympic athletes. He's done research at like the 2012 Olympic Games and the 2016 Olympic Games and works with a lot of national teams on building resilience. So if we look at resilience, we've kind of got the stresses that everyone faces, and then we've got the response, how we respond to those stresses. Ideally, we want to respond in a facilitated manner, but that depends on many psychological factors, such as the personality of the individual, their ability to focus, their motivation, and their confidence. Now, these are things I'm not going to touch on today because I'm talking to a group of coaches and not a group of NPCs. So I'm not going to tell you this is what you have to do to like help their personality, or this is what you have to do to help their motivation or whatnot. It's a topic we can talk about at some point, but for today, I really just want to focus more on like the social support aspect. So really more like the environment that you create as coaches. Yeah. So what can coaches do? Well, the short answer to this question is you can create an environment where athletes are pushed, but supported as well. So finding a balance, again, between challenge versus support. And there's this model that was created by Mustafa Saka and Fletcher, and this is a very, very popular model, and I really like this. And rather than me kind of go into it and explain it to you, I'm going to get the creator, Saka, explain it himself. So surprise, he's not standing here, it's a video only. So it's great to watch this and just take some notes on it and see kind of what comes up. Oh. There we go. Yeah, the volume was on before.
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Musaka. I'm a lecturer in sports and exercise psychology at Nottingham Trent University. One of my main areas of work looks at the notion of resilience. Resilience is a really, really important area in sport. We know that athletes face numerous demands and pressures throughout their sporting careers. And what is it that enables athletes to perform under pressure? And that's what the notion of resilience looks like. And when we're talking about resilience, we talk about it as a dynamic process that results from the interaction of a person and the environment that we're in. But when it comes to developing resilience, we often focus on the athlete or the individual, but we often ignore the role of the environment and the environment that the athlete operates in. So the purpose of today, and what I'm going to be talking about, is looking at the role of the environment in helping athletes to develop resilience. And a quote that I often kind of comes to mind, which really kind of resonates with this idea of the environment, is when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. Using the analogy of the flower, you look at the plant food, you look at water, you don't actually get rid of the flower. And that's really, really important when it comes to resilience. We want to look at the environment that individuals are in to help coaches in particular create really good environments that athletes can flourish and thrive. So what I'm going to be talking about is two real key aspects of the environment, the notions of challenge and also the notions of support. And it's the interaction and the balance between challenge and support that's really, really important when creating a good environment for resilience. So when it comes to the role of the environment, I mentioned the two notions of challenge and support. And what I've got here is on the vertical axis, where you've got high challenge and high support. We've got here high support and also low support. So this is the notion of support on the vertical axis. And on the horizontal axis, you've got challenge, where you've got low challenge and high challenge. And when you break these two things down, you can come up with some sort of matrix. And each of these matrices represent the balance between challenge and support. So in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got an environment where there's low challenge and low support, and that refers to a stagnant environment. This is an environment where not much is going on. You've got no challenge and low support. People are just surviving. Not much is happening in that environment. People feel bored. People don't feel particularly stimulated to work in that environment. On the bottom right, you've got an environment where you've got high challenge but low support. And this is the environment of an unrelenting environment. This is a really, really important environment because often when we're talking about this high challenge, low support environment, this is an environment where individuals, for example, might feel isolated, they might feel quite lonely. There's little care for well-being in an unrelenting environment. There's also kind of a blame kind of culture where individuals are looking to blame external people rather than looking inwardly. The other environment is a high support, low challenge environment, and this is called a comfortable environment. This is an environment where things are going pretty well, but actually people aren't pushed beyond their comfort zone. And even though things might be going well in this particular environment, people aren't stretching themselves. And in this particular environment, you might have great levels of well-being, but you're unlikely to have high levels of performance. The environment that we really want to kind of emphasize is this high challenge, high support environment. And this is called a facilitative environment. And in this facilitative environment, is an environment where individuals feel safe to make mistakes, feel safe to take risks. It's an environment where athletes, for example, are always looking to challenge themselves, always looking to seek out constructive feedback. It's an environment where competitiveness is actually not taken to an extreme level. Competitiveness is used actually as a way to drive each other to do better. And it's an environment where people feel as if they can learn from mistakes, they can use failure as an opportunity to develop and to grow. And what's really important is that each of these environments have certain underpinning characteristics. And it's important to recognize which particular environment we're creating for athletes with the intention of creating this facilitative environment. So I hope that's been useful to give you an idea about the different environments that us as sports psychologists, but also the role of us in helping coaches to create really good environments with the intention of building resilience in athletes. I hope that's been useful for your practice, for some of the research that you might be doing, and thank you very much.
So before we get into the case studies, what are your any thoughts on that? Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. No, that's good. I'm glad it makes sense. One point, oh no, I'll save that for later. So I'm going to put you into separate groups now. There's 6 of you, well, when John gets back. And so I've got 3 case studies I've created. They're fairly straightforward. And I want you to basically get into groups, get into 3 groups, and each group tries to highlight one type of environment this case study represents. And then kind of just like come up with like 3 things that if you were hired to be the coach to come in and work with this team, what would be 3 things you would try and do to create a more facilitated environment? I know that like you just watched a 5-minute video on these different types of environments, and I'm really like throwing you in the deep end here, but it's just a matter of like, what can we come up with as a group? And then we'll kind of share those findings and then hopefully walk away going, okay, we all have an idea of like what these different environments look like and how we might be able to move the needle in the right direction, okay? So I'll give you 2 case studies. Are all these environments detrimental to well-being? Like, facilitate is obviously the ideal one, but the other 3, are they all, for better or worse, bad for the athlete? Or would you say there's some are better, some are worse?
As is, or after we mentioned?
Just as is, like when we look at those 4 different environments.
I mean, for ours in particular, in the comfortable environment, like if we're looking at performance athletes, then maybe not. If it's recreational, it might be great.
Yeah.
So context.
Yeah, I would agree. I think your environment that you had, I don't think it's bad for their well-being at all, unless it's an athlete in there that's like, I want to grow, but like I can't do it here. But if it's just about having fun, you can have a great time. You can sport, like part of sport is just about having fun, and it sounds like that's what the focus is there. But there's just no push to like improve at all. Yeah. So it kind of depends on the situation and the context that you're in. But I think we can agree that. The unrelenting one, that one's not great for that one's not ideal. Okay, so an example of a facilitated environment is basically just this healthy relationships between the coach and the athlete, so where like the coach just cares about the athletes, and like risk taking is encouraged. And that's really important, is this risk taking, because we want athletes to take risks. But like if risks are taken and athletes make mistakes and fail, it's addressed with appropriate feedback. So it's not this like, take some risks, and then if they fail, go like, well, that wasn't good enough, and then leave them at it. Like, provide them with support when they fail. And then, of course, like when they do well, celebrate it, absolutely. We have every reason to celebrate when athletes do well. And the idea as well, like competition within the group, that's good, yeah, like have a competition then. But we don't want to like single out or only focus on the ones that are winning these competitions. We want to like kind of just create a culture or an environment where competition is encouraged, but from a healthy standpoint, that like if the ones who are doing well, yeah, they're celebrated, or the ones who are struggling, maybe we provide them with like feedback and support to kind of raise their game a little bit. And athletes, we want athletes that crave constructive feedback. Like you want athletes in your team that are like what did I do wrong? How can I improve? But athletes don't feel comfortable to ask that question if they're not allowed to ask those questions, right? So a lot of this probably sounds like we've heard this before, but it's all about, as you've seen with the different examples, it's all about finding that balance. There's no do this and then it's great. It all depends on consistently doing this and then finding a balance between challenge and support. And one month it might be they need more support because they're struggling. They've come off a string of losses. Okay, they need more support and less challenge. And then maybe they've been doing really well for a while. Okay, they need less support and more challenge, and that's okay as well. So just like keeping an eye on that and just kind of referring back to that model. And so I want to give you a quick example of the importance of balance. So this is me back in the day when I had more hair on my head than I did on my face. And so about 12 years ago, no, 14 years ago, and I kind of want to just give a background on like me growing up as a golfer. So I had a coach who, my dad was my coach, and like he was a fantastic coach. Thank you, John, for taking that picture. Would definitely not be used against me. My dad was my coach, and like he was a fantastic coach. Like everything he did, and all the coaches I've had since then have helped me become who I am now, and I'm super grateful for it. But if I look back on the relationship I had with my dad as a coach, as an athlete, every time when I was playing, if I wasn't playing well, I'd be like, Dad, what's wrong? And he would just be like, oh, I'm his dad, so I want to help my son struggling, and I want to like support him and whatnot. And he's also my coach, so like wanted to just help me. And so I was like, I'm not hitting the ball well. He'd be like, okay, let's have a look. I hit a few shots. He says, do this, do this, do this. Great, fix it, off you go, well done. Next day, I'm making these mistakes again. He comes in, helps me, supports me. That's fantastic. And like, he was my coach until I turned about 22, and like, I had won state championships and stuff like that. So I'd argue I was fairly successful. Then I moved to the US and go to college. And over there, what happened was I was like, coach, I'm not hitting the ball. And he had a look and he said, it looks fine. And I'm like, but the ball's not going straight. It's going like all over the place. And he's like, it's fine. And I was like, what do you mean it's fine? And he said, figure it out on your own. And I was like, well, what do you mean figure it out? And he said, I don't have time to like babysit you. You need to like figure this stuff out on your own. So there I quickly realized that like I was left to my own devices, and because I had my previous coaching experience was that I was almost like supported non-stop, I just didn't know how to be independent, and I struggled in America. And so the balance there is that on the surface level, I wouldn't say that any of those coaching styles are bad, but it's just about finding the balance and not doing too much. So like I would argue that I was a very dependent golfer when I went to the US, and that caused me problems as a player. But no one intentionally went out their way to make me this way and be like, I'm going to make sure that he is miserable or whatever. So like, I would argue that most coaches in this world do everything with the best intentions at heart. And even with the best intentions, sometimes it can backfire to some extent. So just to kind of like wrap it up now, because I want to leave a little bit of room for questions. Resilience is about finding the balance between challenge and support. It's not just about, and I know this is very much like a bit more old school, it's not just about throwing someone in the deep end and letting them figure it out on their own. Because sure, you throw someone in the deep end, some people might make it out, and that's great, but the majority of them will probably be like, well, this was miserable and I'm done. So we want to make sure that like we kind of like don't just do it like that way. But it's also not about removing all and any challenges that athletes might face. So too much challenge and too little support, the athlete might burn out or just like be miserable. But on the other hand, too much support and too little challenge, that you might just create a set of dependent athletes that can't function on their own. So challenge athletes, but if they're struggling, be sure to prioritize the support area as well, okay? But if athletes are too comfortable, yeah, push them. That's fine. You're allowed to push athletes. Not physically, but like metaphorically speaking. And then like this, like resiliency skills can be developed proactively by like in training sessions when an athlete is facing a challenge and you kind of go like, hey, this is something you've been facing over and over again. I think this is something you could try in a competition. Try this and just stick to this. And then they kind of go out and they try it, and if things go well, then you develop some sort of independence and resilience within your athletes. Yeah. And then moving on to the last slide. As many of you mentioned, encourage athletes to ask questions. If mistakes are made, reflect on them together and ask for athlete input on how they can be overcome. Again, like my experience with coaches is that they care so much about the athletes they work with that they want to provide answers. Like, I'm here to help you. You have a question, I have an answer. And like, I admire that about coaches. but oftentimes when you just give all the answers, athletes aren't encouraged to like come up with a solution themselves. So again, it's about like, it's not about figuring out on your own and going away, but it's about like, that's a really good question. How do you think you might be able to navigate this? And what do you think? And if the athlete has no idea, then guide them a little bit and be like, well, what have we been working on? And what do you think might work? But then over time, hopefully, an athlete comes and says, I'm struggling with this, and then you can say, hey, what do you think you might be able to do? And they say, how about this? And you go, yeah, try it. And so it creates athletes' independence and resilience, and it also takes pressure off you to have to fix every single thing. So it's kind of like a two-way street that hopefully benefits you, but also benefits the athletes in the long run. And then last but not least, create a team of we, where like everyone's recognized and supported, regardless of like how good or bad of a player they are. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? If anyone has any questions and like wants to chat more, like there's my email address. I like talking about this stuff, but I'm happy to just open up to like any questions that anyone might have right now. Comments or.
Did have someone like early in my career, I lived in that like created dependent athletes.
Yeah.
And individuals where like so I mostly coached throwers.
Yeah.
They would take a throw and then immediately look to me.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think? Well, how was that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have those athletes,
Yeah.
is that last point that you talked about there, how you would slowly start to put that on them to give you the feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. But like, if they get uncomfortable and they say like, well, why aren't you telling me? Why are you asking me? You can just be honest with them and be like, look, part of like you becoming a better athlete is you learning how to do this on your own terms. And so I'm going to start encouraging you to answer these questions yourself because I want you to just learn this stuff. And if you just go figure it out, and then they might be like, well, he doesn't care about me anymore. So just gently introducing them to, what do you think? Yeah.
Like I did the same thing early in my career,
Yeah.
and I only learned when I sent an athlete to Junior Worlds, and they had another coach them who had like a very different style. He had to go hard, and I had to go, oh, whoops, like how do we retrain that?
Yeah.
And then the next year, like we went again, and it was like a totally different experience. But yeah, felt terrible, but it was like because I was always there with them, and it's individual, and you do everything for them, and suddenly you're like, oh, is there a way? What do they do?
Yeah. And that speaks to your characteristics as coaches. So like this, I'm not standing here telling you off for it because it just shows like what incredible human beings you are. But if we can kind of create a little bit more independence, it makes your life easier and it helps them be able to function on their own. Yeah.
I asked them, but no.
No, sometimes it's okay.
So, like, when I look at the quadrant matrix,
Yeah, you want to go back to that?
like to be in that facilitated environment, it takes like a really confident and secure coach.
Yeah.
And sort of as I look at like the stagnant environment, you know, one where a coach kind of is afraid of failing.
Yeah.
And then like the comfortable environment, the coach is like probably afraid of rejection.
Yeah.
Rejection. And then that unrelenting, like I said, probably pretty prone to exhausted coach. In terms of like facilitating a coach and their confidence and having the emotional wherewithal.
Yeah.
What are some traits or what are some actions that can be done?
Yeah.
Both from the coach developer and as a coach?
Yeah. That's a really good point, and that's almost like a conversation for another whole separate presentation is why are coaches behaving in these different ways? And you've touched on all the important things there. Like a coach has a lot of stresses that they feel as well. As coaches, you have to like perform to a certain standard, otherwise you might lose your job. And like, yeah, no pressure, but like now try and be like this. It's easier said than done. So most of the reasons people fall into these different things aren't because they actively go, I'm going to make my athlete's life a living hell. Like I hope that that's not the case. You might want to do a different job if that is the way you look at things. But generally speaking, there's a lot of factors that can like kind of encourage push coaches to feel more burned out themselves or more stressed, and then as a likelihood they'll go into those. So there's not one size fits all. One would be trying to get support for the coaches, like having assistant coaches who can take on a more active role, and then also just like maybe letting some of the athletes take on a more active role. Let the athletes help you out. Again, like let athlete leadership kind of like come up with some like training sessions or running some things, so you don't have to be there 24/7, making sure that everything's running smoothly. Like let athletes kind of help you out, but then also like just taking care of yourself, like your own well-being. Like if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of your athletes. So a theme that I usually bring up with coaches is that like look after yourself and then look after the athletes second. It's like the metaphor comes to mind when like you fly on a plane and they say like put on your own oxygen mask before you put on the child's oxygen mask. As coaches, I think oftentimes that you'll put on everyone else's oxygen mask before you put on your own, which is admirable, but it's not helpful or healthy in the long run. So yeah, taking self-care and just maybe providing athletes with a bit more roles and responsibilities, and maybe assistant coaches with more roles and responsibilities. Those would be two basic things that I think that you could implement. But yeah, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Really enjoyed I popped up with that video of Dr. Sarkar.
Yeah.
We just talked about like flowers not growing, you don't fit the flower. I'm just like,
yeah,
so young John has this flower. You know, like
yeah, absolutely.
So such a great way to be like, yes, like there's so many different ways you can water, sun,
yeah,
fertilize, like change things to support something that's like an outlier that's not growing the way we want it to.
Yeah.
It's like I think sometimes it's like, oh, we got all these crops.
Yeah.
But I make nine of them are growing and one of them's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna worry about the 9 that are growing.
Yeah.
It's like, well, that's a shitty coach.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I'd say like
that's cool.
no, absolutely, and I think that's a good way to look at it. It's just like your athlete in terms of flowers. Yeah.
Should have showed that on YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's it. Like I said, like if anyone has any questions, like I'm happy to answer them or just chat more if like something comes up, let's say in the next few weeks, and you're like you've tried it, and you have a question about it, just let me know. Yeah, happy to chat more. But thank you for joining.